Everyone, thank you for your patience and welcome to the Sparks Talks webinar series, all part of the latest Spark campaign brought to you by the Girls Action Foundation. I'm Elvira Trulia, the Communications Coordinator and Web Producer for Girls Action. And in a couple of minutes, I'll be passing the mic to Chief Kim Baird, who will be talking about Tsawwassen First Nation and self-government. We're extremely fortunate to have Chief Baird with us today, so I'm very much looking forward to our presentation. And also happy to see some familiar names joining us for today's webinar. And for those of you who are returning, thanks for coming back and welcome back to Sparks Talks. For those of you who are new to this webinar series, I wanted to briefly introduce you to Girls Action Foundation before passing things on to Chief Baird. So what is the Girls Action Foundation? We are very quickly, Girls Action is a national nonprofit that works to empower girls. We are based in Montreal, where we run local girls programs, and we work with some 250 partners across the country who run their own girls programs. We also provide leadership training, organize networking events, and do many other things that connect girls and young women. In terms of nationally, we reach around 60,000 girls and young women located in remote, marginalized, and urban communities, including the North. So as I mentioned at the top of just a couple of minutes ago, this webinar series is presented as part of Latest Spark. It's a campaign that showcases women role models across the country, and the role models, or what we call Sparks, are involved in the campaign in various ways, and some of those ways are listed on the screens that you should be seeing. There we go. That you should see on screens. So they do blogs, webinars, and many other things. I'm happy to say that Chief Baird is actually one of our Sparks in the Life of the Spark campaign. So just before introducing her, I wanted to walk you through today's webinar and what we'll be doing. Okay, so after a very brief introduction to Kim Baird, we'll be opening up the question and answer period. And after that, we'll be wrapping things up. But just to give you a little bit of a mini introduction to webinars, you'll see various panels on your screens. And to the right-hand side of your screen, you should see panels. One is called Chat, and one is called Q&A. So when at the question and answer period, that's where you will be typing in your question in the Q&A box. So if you have a question or comment during the presentation, type it into the box, and it will be recorded there. And when we open up the Q session, I will be passing those questions on to Kim Baird. If you prefer to send a message privately or just to myself, you can click my name instead of all participants, and the question will come only to me. So, after she speaks, after Kim Baird speaks, we'll be opening up the Q&A period. That's your chance to ask your questions through the chat box. And I also wanted to point out that today's webinar is being recorded, including the question period, and all of this will be posted online in the next few days. And I will be sending everyone a link to the presentation. So just before passing things on, the last thing I'd like to do is to introduce Kim Baird, give you a little bit of a bio for those of you who aren't as familiar with what she does. So Chief Kim Baird, after 10 years as elected Chief of Tsawwassen First Nation, Chief Baird was responsible for implementing British Columbia's first urban treaty in 2009. This was one in a long list of accomplishments for Kim Baird. As a non-MLA, Chief Baird was the first woman in BC history to address the BC legislature on October 15, 2007, when the British Columbia treaty legislation process was initiated. Chief Baird has received a number of awards, including the National Aboriginal Women in Leadership Distinction Award and Canada's Most Powerful Women Top 100 Award. Chief Baird is actively involved as a representative on the Metro Vancouver Board of Directors, the only member of a First Nation to hold this position. She's also involved in various municipal, provincial, and Aboriginal bodies that govern transportation, employment, economic development, and Aboriginal affairs in Vancouver and British Columbia. And with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Chief Kim Baird. Welcome, Chief Baird.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, or I guess it's morning for me at least, anyhow, still. I'd like to start by thanking the organizers of the Girls Action Foundation for asking me to participate in this webinar. It's my first time, so busy on me, I guess I'd say. And usually in my tradition, when First Nations host or invite people to a meeting, it's usually on our traditional territory, and we usually offer welcome. But in this virtual space, I'm a little unsure how to manage this. But since the server to my computer is here, my phone, I guess I'll still welcome everyone to our traditional territory. Over the course of my talk, I'll talk on a variety of themes which I think are important in the context of developing a sustainable First Nations community. And this is an important discussion to be having now, particularly given the recent discourse on the tragic circumstances that are facing Attawapasket. I have a hard time saying that name. A good many people in government, in the media, and in the general public suggest that the community is not sustainable because of how remote it is. And, to some extent, geography certainly has a part to play, but it's equally important that we have a good idea of what sustainability really means. How that definition may differ across countries and cultures. So I will be focusing on Tsawwassen's experience and how we look to build a sustainable community. And while we are not entirely comparable to remote parts of this country, I do think that there is some applicability. In the course of my presentation today, I'll focus on the governance model that we've established in Tsawwassen and outline how we feel that it enables us to achieve the vision that our community has set, and how we will develop sustainably. We have a unique opportunity beginning with the adoption of the first Urban Modern Treaty to be innovative. Starting from the treaty is a bit like starting with a blank canvas that needs to be painted, as through the treaty we have removed the Indian Act from our lives. There is a need to build brand new governance, legal, and regulatory frameworks to grow our community. But it's not just about growth. Our community needs to discuss and define what we would paint on that canvas. So hopefully we're working on a Bill Reid or an Emily Carr. A masterpiece for certain is what we envision. So we've implemented brand new governance systems which mandate extensive civic engagement. Early indications that this framework is resulting in positive social change within our community. There's a culture of governance that is awakening, and I look forward to the opportunity to discuss that with you today. Hopefully we can go to slide 2 now. First, though, let me give you background on the Tsawwassen community. We're a small First Nation located on the coast of the Lower Mainland, situated between the BC Ferry Terminal and Delta Port Container Terminal, south of Vancouver. There are about 435 members, and like other First Nations in Canada, our membership is growing fast. We also have a current population of about 650 non-members living in leasehold developments on our lands, and around half our members live on Tsawwassen lands. We are situated in an urban context, and it's had an enormous impact on our history as a people. Additionally, we were extremely wealthy as a consequence of living at the mouth of one of the most productive rivers in the world. The people hunted, fished, and gathered plants and berries on our traditional territory and other sustenance activities, which covers much of the lower mainland of British Colombia. In conjunction with other First Nations, we exercise sustainable harvesting practices, showing tremendous respect for the lands and waters of the region, as they were the source of our wealth and livelihood. When Europeans came, Tsawwassen was pushed into a tiny postage stamp reserve at the site of our traditional winter village, and we were unable to participate in the decades-long boom that resulted in the growth of Vancouver from a rough logging town to a sophisticated metropolis that is one of the most livable cities in the world. Part of this development, including building Canada's largest West Coast superport to the north of our community, and the construction of a causeway that disrupted the strong tidal flow of the Georgia Strait that brought much sea life to our beaches. Waterfront land now in front of us are bisected by two causeways, one to the Superport and one to a ferry terminal, between no tidal flow to the beach, and so much of our livelihood turned into a swampy marsh with no harvest potential. So the impacts of these developments have shaped our present circumstances for my community, and in some ways have informed our current approach to development. And I'll talk about this a little later as I speak more concretely on our land use plans. But before I do that, third slide, I want to speak of our treaty, which is important in the context of how we govern our community and the opportunities we now have. As a result of a lot of hard work on the part of the community, we negotiated, finalized, and implemented a modern treaty with British Colombia and Canada. It settles our outstanding land claims with BC and Canada and provides us with some cash and access to resources. And our treaty is really a toolbox of opportunities. It's definitely not the end result. It's also a vehicle to reconciliation between Tsawwassen and broader society. And I'll touch on this a little bit later as well, as there are many models of reconciliation that can be used, but the treaty was the route that we chose. Most importantly, in my opinion, through the treaty, we have once again become a self-governing First Nation. We have jurisdiction over a range of lawmaking powers that are ordinarily provincial or federal. We also have exclusive municipal-type planning and regulatory jurisdiction over our lands, including rezoning, development levies, land use planning and development, subdivision and building approvals. Our jurisdiction set out in the treaty is constitutionally protected under Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution. Again, I must emphasize that we have now gotten rid of the Indian Act on our lands. We also have a land base that we own in a manner equivalent to how provinces hold crown land over which we have jurisdiction. This is unique and quite different from the manner in which municipalities own land. It's also a significant departure from the Indian reserve structure, where lands are in actuality owned by the federal government. The ownership and the jurisdiction creates opportunities, but whether they are realized is dependent on how we exercise our jurisdiction and whether the governance processes we use to exercise it are perceived to be clear, credible, transparent, and accountable. And we have worked very hard to establish such a framework, and we feel that the manner in which we have exercised our jurisdiction will support the sustainable development of our community. Slide 4. When talking about reconciliation at its heart, I think we are talking of resolving injustices and of integrating our First Nations communities within the Canadian framework. We often hear talk at the national level of the two solitudes, talking about the French or English parts of Canada, and how both groups have wildly different views or experiences. But there's an equally important solitude that needs to be considered, the huge gulf between the realities of First Nations people and other Canadians. There is, broadly speaking, very little knowledge or understanding between these two communities, and in fact there are wildly different legal and political structures in place, which have historically made it next to impossible for First Nations people to participate in the economy or other political structures in Canada for that matter. Treaty, and in fact all of the various models of reconciliation, change those existing legal frameworks from ones that keep us apart from society into ones that bring us together. In general, it is my view that reconciliation involves three core elements. The first is a land and or financial settlement. This is important recognition of past injustices. However, it should be noted that we view this redress more as a token, as it could never really be sufficient to cover the true costs of colonization. The second is the transformation of relationships, which is part of what helps break down barriers and permit our integration with mainstream Canada. The final element is restoration of self-governing authority, and I'll spend most of my time on this element as I think that is what provides the most opportunity. It also allows us to set out how we will be a sustainable First Nations community. Slide 5. So under the treaty, Tsawwassen is self-governing, and we have exercised this authority to set of laws, all of which are consistent with our own constitution. Tsawwassen's constitution is our foundational document, and it sets out basic governmental institutions and the limitations on our government, including checks and balances. It entrenches the right of our citizens and establishes some of our governance processes. For Tsawwassen, this was an important community building exercise. The Constitution was developed over a 2-year period and involved regular meetings with the community, as was ultimately ratified through a community vote. It incorporates a number of modern principles of good governance in a way that retains important cultural elements. Our governing institutions function through consensus seeking, and our legislative body is sufficiently large to ensure that each of our family groupings are represented. They also entrench the principles of direct accountability, equity, the rule of law, participatory democracy, transparency, responsiveness, efficiency, and vision. Of note, something I'm quite proud of is that 8 of our 13 legislators are women, and we have a wide range of ages represented, including one who's in his early 20s and one who's an elder. A range of views help promote healthy discussion on a wide range of issues. There's also strong emphasis on civic engagement in our governance processes. Our Constitution requires that in addition to having a democratically elected 13-member legislature, we must also have an advisory council of members. This group must be consulted prior to the passage of any law and the passage of our budget. In the years since our treaty came into effect, we've held about 60 consultation meetings with our community. We are also required to hold an annual general meeting following the close of each fiscal year to report to our members. On certain matters, such as those relating to land or membership, we require community votes or referendums before we can proceed. When matters are taken to a vote, we employ a comprehensive engagement strategy, which includes a number of meetings with our community, often including meetings with individual families, youth, elders, and the results of these meetings are not only important in that they inform our members of the upcoming votes, but they're employed to solicit input on proposed initiatives, and the feedback we receive feeds into our governance processes. Finally, we've also established institutions to provide representation to our non-member community who are able to vote in our local elections. The institutions include a consultation committee where leaseholders are consulted on issues that may impact them and where they may raise issues they face. A unique innovation that we have is a property taxation authority, which includes non-members and members and is required to approve of our residential property tax rate before rates can go into effect. Innovation ensures that our leasehold groups have representation on matters relating to taxation. The outcome of these innovations have been hugely positive, and the Tsawwassen government has a very solid relationship with our leasehold community. We feel confident that this has contributed to strong leasehold property values, which is important in our context as well. We will require strong property values to ensure the provision of a sustainable revenue base. Next photo. Next slide. The photo on the slide deck is of our legislature in action. This meeting was held in our longhouse, and we were really lucky to have a number of guests address our legislature that night. And the photo is of Lieutenant Governor Stephen Point, who's a fellow Coast Salish First Nation fellow, and he's making his speech to our Coast Salish legislature. Next slide. Our legislature is an important place where key decisions are made, but all our governing institutions seek to balance their roles and the direction they would like to see with the input of the community. They make decisions in that context. We've engaged with our community to help understand and identify some important principles which can be used to guide our work as leaders. In my view, leading doesn't always mean that you are out in front of your people. In some instances, leading from behind is just as useful. In terms of sustainability, there are a set of principles that have been identified which set out how it is that Tsawwassen defines sustainability. As I noted before, there are many different ways to define this term. In our case, it is tied to that which is important to the Tsawwassen people, and it includes a number of different dimensions. They include economic development and a sustainable economy. Development will provide us with the revenues we need to develop more effective programming and overcome socioeconomic gaps. community livability. While our economic development will include some land development, it is important that our members continue to feel that this is still home. Governance. All nations or local governments that have unsustainable governments usually have poor results in a number of different areas, as the resultant instability has negative impacts. Environment. We have and continue to be stewards of the lands. And culture. There's much work to do in this area, as it has been beaten down through colonization, but realizing our culture is important to sustain our identity. Each of these principles are reflected in our land use plan and our neighbourhood concept plan, which I'll speak about in a second, and also being used to guide how we at Tsawwassen will be assessing development projects. For instance, where a project has a negative impact on one of these dimensions, we will seek to minimize that impact through things such as design standards. While each of these principles is equally weighted from an analytical perspective, we are very much focused on the creation of a sustainable economy at Tsawwassen. Nations have historically been legislated out of the broader economy, and we now feel that we have the opportunity to change that. We feel that once we've completed the build-out of our community, we will have created a sustainable revenue stream that will help us achieve our vision, rebuild our culture, and ultimately achieve socioeconomic parity with those living elsewhere in Metro Vancouver. Next slide. The definition of sustainability is not something that just came out of nowhere. We as a community have come together to build that vision. I noted how that vision guides our actions, and there are some other documents that I want to speak to that will also touch on how we get guidance. The Constitution provides one set of guiding principles, but another foundational document is our 5-year strategic plan. This was also built through extensive community engagement and identified a number of core objectives, a vision statement, which has since been validated. And truth is the foundation of how we define sustainability. The vision statement speaks of the importance of exercising self-governing authority and of orienting service to members. In 2020, Tsawwassen First Nation will be a safe, accessible community with infrastructure and services that will make it the perfect place to raise children and to live. Our community will be close-knit with elders and youth at the core of the community. Our people will be proud of our culture, traditions, and stories, and the Hunkaminam language will be enjoying a revival. Industrial and commercial development will be active and growing and will provide significant revenue to Tsawwassen First Nation and Tsawwassen fee simple interest holders. However, development will not intrude on the environment, views, and idyllic location of Tsawwassen lands. Jobs will be plentiful and businesses owned by our members will be thriving, assisted by successful innovative education program. That's the vision our community came up with, and you can see that some of the themes that are contained in our vision statement are reflected in our definition of sustainability. Slide. Vision statements and guiding principles are great, but in reality they need to be transformed into working documents. For us, our economy will be developed through sustainable land development, but there is a relevant question to ask. How do you make sure that the development is in fact sustainable? Our land use plan, which is a high-level planning document seen on the slide here, sets up permitted uses through our land base. It was also constructed with heavy community engagement and was ultimately put to a community vote, which passed. The land use plan strives to enhance each of the sustainability priority areas that I just discussed, while recognizing that in some instances it will be necessary to seek a balance between them. It encourages the development of district energy given the compact nature of our land base, and that could boost incremental energy savings as compared to a business-as-usual scenario. It encourages the development of green design guidelines to reduce energy consumption and water usage. Some lands remain protected from development in the provincial agricultural land reserve system. And slide 10. You can see from the land use plan we have identified a complete mix of land uses which we feel lead to a complete community. One where people can live, work, and shop in relative proximity. We have land adjacent to the port that are tagged for industrial development, which in addition being a byproduct, past development activities beyond our control provide an opportunity for significant efficiencies leading to reduction in transportation-related CO2 emissions. We have a commercial area in which we are finalizing agreement to develop a shopping centre with 2 experienced developers that will serve both the local and regional population. Our members are pursuing residential developments that are adjacent to the commercial and industrial areas, each of which will complement and support the development of the other. The land use plan is at a relatively high level, and as we go forward, we are in the midst of developing more detailed plans. One plan that has been concluded is a neighbourhood concept plan, which sets out how the residential area of the land use plan will grow. This was also developed through extensive community engagement and included a number of family meetings, as well as engagement and ultimately a consultation meeting with our neighbouring municipality. Next slide. The neighbourhood plan builds upon the framework and certainty established in our land use plan, which provides a long-term vision for Tsawwassen development, but the neighbourhood plan provides detailed policies aimed at facilitating development within the neighbourhood plan area in the near term. And the purpose of the plan is to create a new neighbourhood which respects Tsawwassen's historical and cultural context, reflects best practices in community development and sustainable design, and establishes a high-quality community that serves the need of Tsawwassen, our members, and our future residents. It also places a premium on the creation of a quality public realm, protects tidal marsh while enhancing the educational and knowledge transfer opportunities it can provide. It supports high-density development to support local-oriented commercial and civic services, and encourages laneway housing development for single-family lots to provide for more efficient site servicing and to promote walking and cycling. It identifies a network of greenways linking to a regional Great Blue Heron Way trail connecting Tsawwassen with neighbouring municipalities and beyond. And following this planning exercise, we will be seeking to work with BC Hydro in an energy design build workshop where the opportunities for district energy will be assessed. Slide. All this work is important, and we feel that it will help us meet our community's vision and, in the process, build a leading-edge sustainable community. We feel the treaty has been a vehicle that has provided the legitimacy we've needed to overcome barriers, and we very much feel that we are well on our way to building a sustainable community. Our recent commercial development proposals plan to be built to elite standard, which we're very excited about. Sustainability is an outcome, but it is elusive if things are missing. In our case, I think that if any of our 5 key principles of sustainability are weak, we feel that in the community. We feel that through our governance structures, we've set up a highly transparent and accountable set of processes that will ensure our success. The open dialogue that we've built with our member and non-members communities and with our regional partners that will ensure that those outcomes are a success. Thank you very much for your time today, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Chief Baird. And I should have said this at the very beginning, but I'll say it now. Peggy Brimsicle sent us a welcome message right at the very beginning, and she says that the grade 7 and 8 class in a school in, and I apologize for the pronunciation, Gisgapéjag, Quebec, would like to say hi and thank you for having us.
Oh,
so
thank
we
you.
have a class full of students, 7 and 8 students that are listening in. And actually, Peggy just sent a question asking, what levels of education do you offer on reserve? Where do you get the money to run the reserve, if not from Indian Affairs?
We still receive federal transfers from Indian Affairs for our programs and services, but we haven't had a population to support the need for a school on reserve yet. We have an early childhood education center, so we do preschool. We think in about 5 years we'll be able to build our own school, and because of our self-governance powers within the treaty, we'll be able to create our own school district as well, which we think will be very helpful in overcoming some of the poor education results we've seen from our kids participating in the municipal school district. So we will receive some base funding still from Indian Affairs over time, but as we make money, that funding will decrease, and so we will have to fund these things ourselves through the proceeds of economic development and that kind of thing.
So I just thank you for that, Chief Baird, and I also just want to remind everyone that if you do have a question, to please type it into the Q&A box. It's on the right-hand side of your panel, and I'll give you a couple of minutes to find your way or weave your way through that system as you start. Oh, I've got another question from Jessica Yee, and she thanks you for your words and your leadership, and she says she has two questions. One is how do we deal with issues of lateral violence in our community with our own people? So that's one of her questions. How do we deal with issues of lateral violence in our own community?
Yeah, it's a tough one, and in my personal opinion, I think changing our governance structures are a big focus on what will change that in our community. First Nations are left with an Indian Act band council structure that was imposed on our communities, and most of our community members don't realize that the structure itself is at fault rather than the leaders. And because of this is all my opinion obviously, but because of the impacts of colonization and us having very little power to change our lives, this has led to some pretty serious dynamics in our community, and this is what is known as lateral violence, where we're too busy fighting internally to our community to be able to rise above it. So in our case, I really do think that opening up our governance structures and designing them to fit our community, and there's no right way of doing it. There's no one way of doing it. It's got to be particular to each community's needs. I think that's going to help us, as well as having opportunities that will help our individual members succeed, because we won't, as a community, succeed until all of us are doing well, and that's a huge focus of what we're trying to achieve right now. But it's only 2.5 years into our treaty, so it's early days still for us.
You know what, Jessica asked a second question. She says, the larger issue is supporting our people to feel supported to do this. Hang on, I think she's Jessica's typing away. I'm going to start with the beginning of her second question. What is your vision for Government of Canada to meet our communities on a nation-to-nation level? I am from Tsawwassen, and we have a nation-building department dedicated to moving us away from the Indian Act. The larger issue is supporting our people to feel supported to do this, and also talking directly to people about restoring and empowering self-government. And it's not just for elected officials to do. We embody this every time we walk out in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and that's how we did it. It was a grassroots initiative that built our new governance structures. It was a community group. I mean, we're a small community, only 435 or so, but we had about 12 to 15 members meet every 2 weeks for over 2 years to develop our constitution. Now, there's this famous saying that the lawyer of the Niska used to say, that modern treaties are viewed as marriages by First Nations to the Crown, whereas the Crown views treaties as divorces. And I'm sad to say in Tsawwassen's case, we viewed our treaty as a divorce, because we just don't have faith that the federal government will ever be able to meet our needs. They have failed us for close to 2 centuries now, and my cynical view is that they will always continue to fail us. So our whole point of governance is to actually get away from the federal government. We have little hope that they'll treat us on a nation-to-nation basis. So our strategy has been to have enough autonomy and jurisdiction through self-government where we won't have to interact with them very much, if at all, through time. I don't know if her questions are quite complex, so I don't know if I've covered some of what she's asking.
I think she does, and there's quite a few more questions coming coming in, so I want to get to them. But what you just mentioned sort of leads into what you mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, which is related to look at events in I have a difficult time putting that one too. Tsawwassen First Nation in Northern Ontario, and how it's really brought struggles of First Nation communities back into public attention. And there's been tons of media coverage. And in one of the things that I read and saw, the First Nations Sean Adleo said the way forward is based on respectful treaty implementation and equitable share of resources from their land, not imposed, punitive, or unilateral action. That is exactly what has given us the status quo we see today. Do you think that this is sort of a turning point in relations and government relations?
I really hope so. But there's I've heard upwards of 100 of these sorts of communities. And there's this complacency in Canada about the situation. And part of me thinks it's because people feel so overwhelmed by the situation. But I'm hopeful that we can turn our minds as a country to, as Sean Atleo says, smash the status quo. And, in some cases it is about money. It will require investment so that the things most Canadians take for granted, such as education and clean water, are a minimum standard for every community. So there's that aspect of it, but it's also sort of turning the relationship from the current sort of paternalistic system into supporting First Nations taking on their own nation building, their own governance development, their own ability to get out from the sort of oppressive regime of the Indian Act. But it's really important that First Nations are encouraged to do so at their own pace, recognizing their own capacity. Because if you impose it, then it's, a forced assimilation rather than a sought reconciliation or integration, if you will.
Thanks for that. And that leads nicely into Teprine Baldo's question. And Teprine asks, my first question is, do you still work with Indian Affairs? And secondly, Dr. Alfred Univik theorizes that self-governance is impossible if nations are still working in the Canadian government model of assimilation. What do you think about that?
Well, there's two very good questions. The first one is, we still have aspects to implement our treaty. We still get federal finance agreement transfers, so that means we have to interact with Indian Affairs in relation to the funds we receive, but the reporting burden is far less than it was under the prior to the treaty. Our audit is more like a mainstream audit of a entity our size instead of the 300-page sheets of numbers that nobody reads. So it's improved. We haven't completely eliminated them from our lives, but we've greatly decreased the need of them. All our decisions are our own now, aside from funding issues, and I can't tell you what a difference that is as far as any of our laws we pass, any of the decisions we made are never second-guessed by the minister. And that's been a great liberation, if you will. The second component about sovereignty versus being within the Canadian framework or not, I'm a little more pragmatic about my approach to things. I want results for our kids now. I don't want to wait for a perfect sovereign heaven, if you will. And I don't mean to be provocative. I mean to tell you my perspective is very, very pragmatic, and I think if we let the perfect get in the way of the good, that we're doing our community a disservice, especially if to really think through going to complete sovereignty and being outside of the rules of Canada with our tiny communities. If you look at the jurisdiction we're receiving in our treaty, it will take us a generation to be able to take up that jurisdiction because of our current capacity restraints. So I think we can make improvements with a less than perfect ideal situation. Our agreement was about compromise, and there are lots of things about our agreement I detest, but I still think there's enough there where we will dramatically change the lives of our members because of that pragmatism, and I make no apologies for that. I'm very proud of what we're achieving as a community.
Thank you, Chief Baird. And Retta Charles asks, it has been mentioned a few times that your community managed to get around, and she puts that in quotes, the Indian Act. Could you explain how you managed to exclude the Indian Act from the government structure?
So instead of the Indian Act, the only thing the Indian Act applies to us is in determining who are status Indians. And that is, Indian Affairs retains that power because it's tied up to the funds they have to give us if we are delivering programs and services in agreement with them through our fiscal finance agreement. So aside from that, the treaty replaces the Indian Act, and the treaty has a concurrent law model where all the jurisdiction is sort of outlined. And there's a conflict in laws that outlines who laws prevails. So, for example, we can't do a environmental law that would trump the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act. The Canadian Environmental Assessment Act would prevail if we created an environmental law. But things like land use decisions are completely our own decision. No one can stop us from building what we want as long as it complies with navigation laws and the criminal code and those sorts of things, as well as environmental laws. But no one can fetter our decision-making process. So the treaty itself outlines a number of jurisdictions, and all these jurisdictions are protected in the Canadian Constitution under Section 35. So this is dramatically different than the Indian Act. And we no longer have a delegated model, but we are integrated somewhat into the provincial system as well, and we've done that by choice. Another thing on that integration concept, I think that just because we can make up new systems, proprietary systems, legal, political, or otherwise, doesn't mean we should always do so. I think we should spend our time focusing on more the bread and butter issues of our community than creating obscure systems. So again, that's the pragmatist in me that wants to really spend our time focusing on issues that will make a difference to the day-to-day lives of our people. And that's pretty much our approach and how we do things.
So sort of in that light, I just wanted to note that your treaty came into effect in 2009. That was after a 16-year process.
Yeah.
So that could seem daunting to some, and if my statistics are correct, it seems like I believe that there are 24 modern treaties, settlements with the Canadian government. So, and 2 of those are self-government. Two
BC have self-government and land claim settlement combined. I know a lot of the Yukon First Nations are moving into self-government as well. So it's true that out of the around 24 modern land claim settlements, not all of them have self-government provisions, but that's increasing. And in BC, the unique thing about BC is that almost all the First Nations, and there's over 200, and BC never signed a treaty with BC and Canada or with the federal government. So there are no historic treaties, or very few in BC to start from. So that's why, for the most part, those in the treaty process are dealing with the land claim and self-governance at the same time.
So how do you were mentioning earlier that you have a pragmatic approach, and it seems like there's different ways sort of approaching the issue, and Chief Adleo said there's the hard way and the harder way. In your opinion, sort of, do you think you should be going towards sort of the treaty negotiation model, or demanding better governance with the Canadian government?
Well, I think that anything that is on the spectrum towards self-governance is going to be key to eradicating poverty in Canada. And whether that be a self-government agreement with the federal government, whether that be improving the opportunities to improve governance under the Indian Act, or whether it be people's assertion of the inherent right of self-government. I think all those are helpful. In my experience, negotiating with the federal government, when you have a final product, you have other governments recognizing your institutions and your jurisdiction because it's legislated. It makes a big difference. I no longer have to assert. We used to feel like we were always whining, we're a government too. I don't have to do that anymore. It's a given when we walk in a room, and that was the real benefit of the negotiated approach in my view. But it is painful stuff, this stuff, and at the community level, designing our future is some of the most painful discussions we've had in our community, and they're much about growing pains. I mean, this decolonizing business is work, and it takes a lot of vision, and it takes a lot of drive, because if you start down this road and it doesn't go anywhere, you're just opening all these cans of worms of points of contention in your community without any way to resolve any of them. So I totally do believe that there is the hard and the harder way when it comes to this stuff, because we have serious work to do in our communities to overcome these issues.
Thank you. And actually, Michelle Holiday has another question. She says, non-First Nation leaders struggle with the idea of consensus. For example, the global Occupy movement has been trying to use consensus, but it seems to lead to impasse. It's just, and give me a second as I scroll down. It's just many individual voices without clear stewardship of the whole. Can you comment on the fullness of consensus as seen and practiced within your cultural tradition? What are non-First Nations leaders missing within that concept?
Oh, it's so tough. I mean, in our constitution, our community was satisfied with one person, one vote system where majority rules. We try and hit consensus as much as possible, but the more people you get, the more complicated it becomes. And I think there's a general dissatisfaction in broader Canada with institutions. The institutions at play do not seem to resonate with Canadians based on people I talk to. And so are there ways that we can engage our citizens across this country that doesn't quite go as far as consensus, but ensures that people can contribute, participate, be heard, and again, feel like they're contributing? I think there are ways. You know, in some ways my community is really small, so I'm lucky. I have sat in almost every living room of every house in our community and outside our community of our members to talk about these issues. Our other politicians in Canada don't have it that easy, but certainly we should try and look to re-engaging, especially our youth in this country, to feel like Canada is their place and that these are their institutions and that they can participate in them. If there was an easy answer, I think it would be fixed already.
Yeah, it is. If I can really say, I agree with you. It's very tough work. There are some other comments and questions. As a follow-up to Preen, where the personal, actually this was Peggy who asked this question, where do you get the personal strength to keep pushing forward?
I don't know. if someone told me back in the day when I started working for Tsawwassen in 1990, that it would take this long. Would I have gone for it? I really don't know. I do know that I have passion for my community. I do know that what I see now is the status quo is unacceptable. And I spent a lot of time fighting with the government. It was like batting my head against the wall negotiating this treaty. But now, although the work is almost exponential compared to negotiations, I mean, it's almost a case of be careful of what you wish for, because the work we have ahead of us is mind-boggling. At least it's work that's rebuilding our community, which is much more satisfying than, negotiating the agreement was. So now that we have this toolbox, we have all these opportunities, and we're going from a problem of poverty management into very quickly having to worry about wealth management. Within the next 5-10 years, we will have money for our community to fight over, and those are far better problems to have than the previous ones. So I think it's just taking things in bite-sized pieces and just keep moving forward, right?
I just want to make a note that since we did start a couple minutes late, we will be ending a couple of minutes late, so I want to make sure that everyone is okay with staying on the call. A couple of people had sent messages saying that there were some audio issues. Hopefully you're able to hear the audio broadcast again. Sometimes, depending on connectivity issues, it might cut in and out, but hopefully you've been able to rejoin and re-listen. Just following up on what you just mentioned, Chief Baird, I wanted to ask you if you're happy where things are going so far. It's been a couple of years since it's gone into practice, and that it's actually been implemented. Do you that you're on track in terms of where you sort of see the vision for your community going? And the next, you talked about the vision for 2020, or do you think that you're on track in achieving that vision?
I think so. I mean, my staff would probably think that I'm not happy because I'm hard to work for. I set a very great pace as far as trying to move a lot of things forward at the same time. We've got a lot of balls in the air, and so I am impatient. I want to see shovels in the ground. I want to see money in the bank. I want to see all these things, but have to realize that, some of the issues we're trying to overcome have developed over generations. So trying to keep that in perspective, I'm still an impatient kind of person, so I'm still driving things at a fairly aggressive pace here. But like I said, I think we are on the right track there. In my heart of hearts, I would never, ever turn back to the Indian Act system, ever. So so far from what I've seen, it's been very liberating for our community. And I think that so far, by far, the trade-offs have been worth the autonomy we have now.
And on that note, actually, Jessica Yee wrote in a question, well, basically stating that there's a difference between treaty and settlement. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that, in the nuances?
Well, yeah, I mean, this kind of gets into what I term as the more highfalutin sort of concepts of Aboriginal law and reconciliation. And what I find interesting is there is debate over whether our treaty was a treaty or a land claim agreement, or was it something else. And at the end of the day, it's not our treaty that is being referenced very much. It's our book of legislation, the 23 laws we passed on effective day, that are dog-eared because everyone is reading them all the time. So there are years worth of debates we've had over the constitutional status of our lands and these sorts of things that all are important from a principle basis. And like I said, there are aspects of the treaty that I find offensive. We don't spend a lot of time worrying about anymore because we're too busy rebuilding our community.
On that note, I really want to thank you really big thank you for joining us today, and thank all the participants for joining us today. And before wrapping up, there's someone that was asking about how to get more information about how treaties really work in Canadian society. I've pulled up your the Tsawwassen First Nation website up on the screen for people to see. I think that's a good source of information.
Also, there's the BC Treaty Commission has a lot of information about the modern making treaty process.
And so another source, and we can maybe send a few links to people when I send everyone a link to the
and the First Nations Governance Centre has a lot of information about First Nation self-governance.
Okay, that's great. So I wanted to just say a couple of closing words, and again, thank you for joining us. To you, Chief Baird, and also to all of the participants, and also patience if you did experience any type of technical difficulty. It is a work in progress, the webinar technology process. And I just wanted to also encourage you to go to the girlsactionfoundation.ca site to get more information about the latest Spark campaign, which I did mention in the beginning that this is part of this webinar series presented as part of that campaign, and there you'll find out more about webinars, the different Sparks that signed on to the campaign, how you can get more involved, and also just to note that there is another Sparks webinar coming up in the month of January, so that might interest you as well. It's on a very different subject, networking, the do's and don'ts. So that's on January 19th, and I wanted to give last word to you if you want to close things off for today, Chief Baird.
Other than that, this was my very first webinar, and we had some technical difficulties, and so I really appreciate the opportunity, and I know that my views are somewhat controversial to some, because what we're doing is not the known path, and I'm very excited though, and we're always happy to help other First Nations find out about what we're doing, even if First Nations don't think they want to go through a modern land claim agreement or self-government agreement. There's lots of information we're willing to share about our experience for people to consider, and we must meet with one First Nation a month to go through all that. So I really appreciate people taking the time and their interest, and thanks.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.